I met Elena during a mutual friend's art exhibit. She was captivating, confident without being arrogant, charming in the kind of way that made everyone want to be near her. I had always been more of the quiet type, the guy in the back who observes rather than participates. I guess you could say she brought a vibrancy into my otherwise structured and predictable life. Our marriage was, at first, a testament to how two very different people could complement one another. Elena was creative, a dreamer with a knack for drawing people in. She worked as a freelance graphic designer, balancing her unpredictable schedule with spontaneous outings or hobbies. I, on the other hand, thrived in the routine of my engineering career. I liked order and certainty, and Elena seemed to thrive on bringing a bit of chaos into that order. We built a good life together, or so I thought. We laughed often, supported each other, and always said, "I love you," before bed. But over time, things shifted in ways I couldn't quite articulate. Maybe it was the silent cracks that began to form in our foundation, hidden behind the smiles we wore in front of family and friends. Or maybe, just maybe, we had ignored some fundamental incompatibilities in the hope that love would always be enough. Our personalities had a way of clashing and complementing at the same time. Elena was unapologetically bold and free-spirited. I was analytical, sometimes to a fault. She'd often tease me about how I could suck the magic out of a sunset by trying to calculate the angle of the sun. But I adored her for it. For the longest time, she made me feel alive in a way no one else ever had. In hindsight, there were signs I chose to ignore. Her wandering eyes at social events, the way she would light up when receiving compliments from strangers, or the slight disappointment that crept into her face when I opted for practical plans over whimsical adventures. Still, I loved her deeply, and I believed we were building something solid. We had been married for 5 years, and while it wasn't always perfect, it was ours. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Looking back, the first real strain in our marriage began after Elena decided to pursue a new hobby, salsa dancing. It started innocently enough, as most things do. She mentioned wanting to try something new, and I encouraged her. I figured it was one of those short-lived interests she'd pick up for a few weeks before moving on to something else. But this one stuck. She came home glowing after each lesson, more excited than I'd seen her in years. She raved about how liberating it was, how she felt alive when the music flowed through her. I loved seeing her happy, but it came with a strange pang of insecurity. Her enthusiasm made me realize how much she'd been missing something in her life, something I apparently couldn't give her. I considered joining her for a lesson or two, but the idea of being in a room full of strangers, rhythmically flailing around, was horrifying. Besides, Elena said it was her time to decompress, to have something that was just hers. I respected that, though part of me felt like an outsider peeking into her life. She started staying out later after classes, going to social dance nights with her group. I'd wait up for her, pretending to read or watch TV, while wondering why I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my chest. Our conversations shifted around that time, too. It wasn't that she stopped talking to me. It was more like she stopped talking with me. She'd recount stories about her dance partners, her instructors, or the latest routines they'd learned. I smiled, I nodded, I asked questions, but it felt like she was talking at me rather than to me. The connection we once had seemed to be slowly unraveling, thread by thread. It wasn't just the dancing. Over the years, Elena had grown more restless, craving excitement in ways I couldn't quite understand. I tried to support her hobbies and dreams, but I wasn't the adventurous type. My idea of a good time was a quiet night in, while she wanted to explore the world. We had always been opposites in that sense, but it had never felt like a problem before. Now, though, it was beginning to feel like a chasm. One evening, she came home late from one of her dance events, her cheeks flushed and her eyes sparkling. I made a casual comment about how much time she was spending at the studio lately, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. Her response caught me off guard. "Maybe you should come with me sometime," she said, but her tone wasn't inviting, it was accusatory. "You don't even try to be part of this part of my life." "I'm not much of a dancer, Elena," I replied, trying to defuse the tension. "But I'm happy that it makes you happy." She sighed and shook her head, the sparkle in her eyes dimming. "Sometimes I feel like you don't really know me anymore." The words stung more than I cared to admit. I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. Instead, I retreated into myself, as I always did when confronted with feelings I couldn't neatly solve. That night, as she fell asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling, wondering when the distance between us had grown so wide, and if I could ever close it. The tension in our marriage ebbed and flowed after that night, like a tide we couldn't control. Some days were filled with fleeting moments of closeness, cooking dinner together, laughing at a shared memory, but they were always followed by stretches of silence that felt heavier than before. I thought about bringing up therapy or a vacation to reconnect, but every time I worked up the courage, Elena seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. Then one evening, she blindsided me. It was a Saturday night, and we just finished dinner. I was loading the dishwasher while she sat at the table, swirling a glass of wine in her hand. Her expression was serious, almost unreadable, and when she spoke, her words hung in the air like a fog. "Have you ever thought about an open marriage?" she asked. I froze, the sound of plates clinking in my hands suddenly deafening. I turned to face her, trying to process what I just heard. "An open marriage?" I repeated, as if saying it aloud might change the meaning. She nodded, her eyes searching mine for a reaction. "I mean, we've been together for years, and I don't know. Maybe it's natural to want to experience other things, other people. It doesn't mean I love you any less. It could actually strengthen what we have." Her words felt like a slap to the face, even though her tone was calm, almost rehearsed. I stared at her, struggling to find my voice. "Where is this coming from, Elena? Are you unhappy?" She looked down at her glass, avoiding my gaze. "It's not about being unhappy. I think people evolve, you know? And maybe what we had before isn't enough anymore." "Not enough?" My voice cracked despite my effort to stay composed. "Elena, we made vows to each other. We promised to be each other's enough. I don't understand how this is even a conversation." Her eyes softened, but there was a stubbornness behind them. "I'm just being honest, okay? I think honesty is better than pretending everything is fine when it's not." I shook my head, anger bubbling beneath my confusion. "This isn't honesty. This is you looking for permission to sleep with other people." "That's not fair," she said defensively, setting her glass down with a clink. "It's about freedom. It's about trust." "No," I said firmly, my voice rising. "It's about you wanting to have your cake and eat it too. And I can't. I won't be part of something like that." She sighed and leaned back in her chair, as if she had expected this reaction all along. "I just thought it was worth discussing. I don't want to feel trapped." "Trapped?" I repeated, my heart sinking. "Is that what this marriage feels like to you?" She didn't answer right away, but her silence spoke volumes. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were glassy. "I didn't mean it like that. I love you, but I don't know. I just need something more." I stood there for a long moment, feeling the ground shift beneath me. The woman I had married, the woman I had built my life around, was telling me I wasn't enough for her anymore. And though she framed it as a conversation, it felt more like an ultimatum. "No," I said finally, my voice steady but cold. "If that's what you need, then I'm not the husband for you. I don't want to share you, Elena. That's not what love means to me." She stared at me, a flicker of disappointment crossing her face. "I didn't expect you to understand." And with that, she stood and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with the weight of her words. After our conversation about the open marriage, Elena and I settled into an uneasy truce. She didn't bring it up again, but something between us had irrevocably changed. She became more withdrawn, her laughter quieter, her touch less frequent. I tried to bridge the growing gap, to find some semblance of the woman I had fallen in love with, but it was like chasing a shadow. And then there was her phone. I noticed the subtle shifts in her behavior. She started guarding her phone more closely, angling the screen away from me whenever a notification popped up. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I shouldn't let suspicion cloud my judgment. But deep down, I knew. I just didn't have the courage to confront it yet. Elena's late nights became more frequent. She claimed they were dance socials or girls' nights, but her explanations felt rehearsed. The turning point came one Friday evening when she came home well past midnight, her hair disheveled and the faint scent of cologne on her clothes. "You're late," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral as I sat on the couch waiting for her. She blinked, clearly caught off guard by my presence. "Yeah, the event ran longer than I expected," she replied casually, kicking off her heels and heading to the kitchen for a glass of water. I followed her, watching as she moved with practiced ease, avoiding eye contact. "You didn't text me," I said. "I didn't think I needed to," she shot back, her voice sharper than I'd expected. "It's not about needing to," I replied, my patience fraying. "It's about respect, about letting me know where you are and when you'll be back." She sighed, leaning against the counter with her glass in hand. "God, you make it sound like I'm a teenager breaking curfew." I stared at her, searching for the woman I used to know. "You've been distant, Elena. I'm not blind. Something's going on, and I deserve to know what it is." For a moment, I thought she might tell me. Her lips parted, and her eyes softened as if she were about to confess something. But then she shook her head and laughed bitterly. "You're imagining things," she said, brushing past me. "I'm tired. I'm going to bed." But I wasn't imagining things. The truth came a few weeks later. I came home early from work one day, hoping to surprise her with her favorite takeout. As I approached the house, I noticed a car parked in the driveway. It wasn't hers. I stepped inside quietly, the sounds of muffled laughter drifting from the living room. My chest tightened as I walked closer, and there she was, sitting on the couch with a man I didn't recognize, their bodies leaning too close, their hands brushing with familiarity. "Elena," I said, my voice breaking the spell. She froze, her face paling as she turned to look at me. The man stood abruptly, his eyes darting between us. "I should go," he muttered, grabbing his coat and making a hasty exit. "Elena, who the hell was that?" I demanded, my voice trembling with anger and disbelief. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she crossed her arms, as if shielding herself from my gaze. "It's not what it looked like," she said finally. "Don't insult me," I snapped. "Who was he?" "A friend," she said weakly, her voice barely audible. "A friend?" I repeated, my blood boiling. "Friends don't sit that close, Elena. Friends don't sneak around when their husband isn't home." She looked down, her silence confirming what I already knew. I felt the air leave my lungs, the weight of betrayal crashing down on me. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice hollow. "It's not serious," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "It just happened. I didn't mean for it to." I stared at her, the woman I had loved and trusted, and for the first time in our marriage, I didn't recognize her. I stood there, silent, as Elena's words sank in. "It just happened." The phrase echoed in my head, hollow and meaningless. Was that supposed to justify what she had done? Was I supposed to accept her betrayal as some unintentional accident, like tripping on a sidewalk? "Who is he?" I asked finally, my voice eerily calm. Elena hesitated, biting her lower lip as though trying to decide whether to lie or tell the truth. "He's someone I met at the dance studio," she admitted. Of course. That damn studio. I should have seen this coming. All those late nights, all those glowing descriptions of her dance partners. It had all been right in front of me, and I'd ignored it. "Does he have a name?" I pressed. "Chris," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Chris." I let the name hang in the air, venom dripping from every syllable. "And how long have you been seeing him?" She didn't answer. "Elena," I said, my tone sharp enough to make her flinch. "How long?" She wiped at her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "A few months," she admitted. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. A few months? While I'd been here, cooking her meals, cleaning our home, and working overtime to support us, she'd been sneaking around with someone else for months. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger from boiling over. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking despite my best efforts to stay composed. "Why would you do this to us?" She sniffled, shaking her head. "I don't know. I didn't plan it. He made me feel alive. Like I wasn't stuck in this routine." "Routine?" I repeated, my chest tightening. You mean our marriage? The life we built together? It's not like that, she said quickly. I love you, but I needed something more. There it was again, more. That word she'd thrown at me the night she suggested an open marriage. It wasn't enough to break me then, but now? Now it felt like a knife being twisted in my chest. You needed something more, I said bitterly, pacing the room. And instead of coming to me, instead of trying to work on this together, you decided to throw everything away for. What? A fling? Some excitement? Her silence was deafening. I stopped pacing and turned to face her. Do you love him? She looked at me, her tear-streaked face a mix of guilt and desperation. No, she said firmly. I love you. I always have. Love me? I laughed bitterly. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this, Elena. You wouldn't have betrayed me like this. I made a mistake, she said, stepping closer, her voice trembling. I was stupid, I was selfish, but I don't want to lose you. Please, we can fix this. I backed away from her, my stomach turning at the thought of her touch. Fix this? I repeated, incredulous. How do you fix something after you've burned it to the ground? She started crying harder, her shoulders shaking as she sank onto the couch. I wanted to feel pity for her, some spark of compassion, but all I could feel was anger, pain, and a deep sense of betrayal. I need time, I said finally, my voice cold and distant. Time to figure out what's left of us, if there's anything left at all. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing behind me. As I closed the door to our bedroom, I leaned against it, letting the tears I'd been holding back spill over. This wasn't how our story was supposed to go. The days after her confession were a blur. Elena and I existed under the same roof, but it felt like we were living in separate worlds. The silence was unbearable, each unspoken word weighing heavier than the last. She tried to talk to me a few times, but I couldn't bring myself to engage. Every time I looked at her, I saw flashes of her with him, Chris. I spent most of my time at work, staying late to avoid coming home. When I was home, I buried myself in distractions, books, TV, anything that kept me from thinking about what had happened. Elena, on the other hand, seemed to hover around me, desperate for some kind of reconciliation. She'd make small gestures, cooking my favorite meals, leaving little notes apologizing for what she'd done. But they only made me angrier. They felt hollow, like putting a bandage on a wound that needed stitches. One evening, about a week after her confession, she finally broke the silence. Are we just going to live like this forever? She asked, her voice cracking. I looked up from the book I was pretending to read. She stood in the doorway of the living room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She looked small, vulnerable, like she was holding herself together by a thread. I don't know, Elena, I said, my voice flat. What do you want me to say? I want you to tell me what you're thinking, she said, stepping into the room. I want to know if there's any hope for us. I set the book down and stared at her, my frustration boiling to the surface. What I'm thinking? I repeated. I'm thinking about how the woman I married lied to me, betrayed me, and expects me to just move past it like it's nothing. She flinched at my words, tears welling in her eyes. It's not nothing, she said softly. I know I hurt you. I know I made a horrible mistake, but I don't want to lose you. I laughed bitterly. You should have thought about that before you decided to cheat on me. Her tears spilled over, and she wiped at them angrily. I don't know what else to say to you. I've apologized. I've told you I love you. What more do you want from me? What I want is for this to have never happened, I said, my voice rising. But you made sure that's not possible. She stared at me, her expression shifting from sadness to anger. You think this is easy for me? She snapped. You think I don't hate myself for what I did? I'm trying, but you won't even let me. Because you don't deserve it, I shot back, the words flying out before I could stop them. She recoiled as if I'd slapped her, and for a moment, I regretted saying it. But I didn't take it back. It was the truth. She turned and left the room, slamming the door behind her. I sat there, staring at the empty doorway, feeling a mix of anger, guilt, and exhaustion. I wanted to fight for our marriage, But how do you fight for something that feels so irreparably broken? That night, as I lay in bed alone, I realized that I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt humiliated. She had made a mockery of our vows, of the life we had built together, and no amount of apologies or gestures could erase that. I needed clarity. I needed space. And I wasn't sure if I could find either with her still here. The distance between us grew into a chasm. Conversations became terse, hollow exchanges about groceries or bills, spoken more out of necessity than anything else. Elena continued to try, making small gestures, asking how my day went, but I couldn't bring myself to engage. Every word out of her mouth felt like a lie, every touch a reminder of what she'd done. But I wasn't just angry anymore. I was tired of the silence, the resentment, the endless replaying of what I'd seen and heard. I couldn't live like this, stuck in limbo between trying to forgive her and wanting to burn everything we'd built to the ground. Then, one night, I reached my breaking point. It was late, and I was in the spare room I'd been sleeping in since her confession. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with images I couldn't banish. I got up and went to the kitchen for water. As I passed the living room, I saw her sitting on the couch, her phone in her hand. Her face was lit by the screen, and she was smiling, a soft, private smile I hadn't seen in months. Something inside me snapped. "Who are you talking to?" I asked, my voice cutting through the quiet. She jumped, startled, and quickly locked her phone. "No one," she said too quickly, her voice defensive. "Don't lie to me," I said, stepping closer. "Who was it?" "No one, I swear," she said again. But her hands were trembling as she set the phone down beside her. I reached for it, and she tried to grab it first, but I was faster. I unlocked the screen. It wasn't hard. I knew her passcode, and my stomach dropped as I saw the name. Chris. My chest tightened as I scrolled through the messages. They were flirty, playful, and worse, intimate. It was clear that their connection hadn't ended, despite her promises and apologies. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded, my voice shaking with fury. She didn't answer, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "How long, Elena?" I shouted, my anger boiling over. Since after you found out," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything, after all the promises and tears, she was still seeing him. I threw her phone onto the couch, the sound of it hitting the cushions echoing in the room. "This marriage is over," I said, my voice cold and final. "Wait," she pleaded, standing up and reaching for me. "Please, don't do this. I made a mistake." "Stop calling it a mistake," I yelled, cutting her off. "A mistake is something you regret the moment it happens. You didn't regret this. You chose it, Elena. You chose him." She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, but I didn't feel pity. I felt nothing. The love I'd clung to, the hope that had kept me here, was gone. "I want you out of this house by the end of the week," I said, turning to leave the room. "Where am I supposed to go?" she cried, her voice desperate. "Not my problem," I replied, not bothering to look back. I went to bed that night, and for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. The next morning, I woke up feeling strangely calm, as though the storm inside me had finally passed. The decision to end it had brought me clarity, even if it was painful. But there was still one thing left to do. I had to confront Elena with the finality of my choice, and make it clear that there was no coming back. I found her in the kitchen, sitting at the table with her head in her hands. She looked up when she heard me enter, her eyes swollen from crying all night. "Can we talk?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to," I replied, sitting across from her. She started to speak, but I held up a hand to stop her. "No more excuses, Elena. No more apologies. I've made my decision, and I need you to hear it." Her eyes welled with tears, but she nodded, bracing herself. "This marriage is over," I said, my voice steady. "I've tried to process what you've done, to figure out if there's a way to move past it. But there's not. You didn't just betray me. You disrespected me, our vows, and the life we built together. And then, even after I gave you a chance to make things right, You chose him again. I didn't mean to, she began, but I cut her off. You did mean to, I said sharply. Every text you sent, every meeting, every lie. It was all a choice. And now, I'm making mine. She broke down, sobbing into her hands. I felt no satisfaction in her pain, only a deep, aching emptiness. I want you out of the house by the end of the week, I continued, my tone firm. Take whatever you need, but leave everything I've given you. Every gift, every piece of jewelry, it all stays here. You don't get to keep the things that were meant to symbolize a love you destroyed. Her head shot up at that, her face a mixture of shock and indignation. You can't just throw me out like this, she said, her voice trembling. I can and I will, I replied, my gaze unwavering. This house is in my name, and I've already spoken to my lawyer. The divorce papers will be ready soon. She stared at me, as if trying to find a crack in my resolve, but there was none. I was done. Where am I supposed to go? She asked again, her voice breaking. That's not my problem, I said, echoing the words I'd spoken the night before. You'll figure it out, just like you figured out how to betray me. Her tears fell harder, but I stood and left the room. I couldn't take it anymore. The rest of the week was tense, to say the least. Elena packed her things in silence, her face a mask of grief. I avoided her as much as possible, focusing on work and reaching out to friends and family for support. By the end of the week, she was gone. As I stood in the now empty house, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that the weight of her betrayal was no longer suffocating me, and sorrow for the life we'd lost. But I knew I had made the right choice. The house was eerily quiet after Elena left. Her absence was a heavy thing, pressing down on me like a phantom. The living room felt hollow without her presence, the kitchen too clean without the chaos of her cooking experiments. For the first time in years, I was truly alone, and while it was liberating in some ways, it was also suffocating. I spent the first few days in a haze, alternating between relief and sadness. I knew I had done the right thing by ending the marriage, but that didn't make the loss any easier. I wasn't just grieving the relationship. I was grieving the person I thought she was, the future we had planned, and the life I had built around her. It didn't take long for the news to spread. Friends and family began calling, some offering support, others fishing for details. I kept my answers vague, not wanting to relive the pain with every conversation. My parents were heartbroken, and my mother kept asking if I was sure this was what I wanted. Yes, Mom, I told her firmly. It's over. She made her choice, and now I've made mine. I decided to focus on reclaiming my life. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to keep my mind busy. I started going to the gym again, something I hadn't done in years. It was cathartic, channeling all my anger and frustration into the weights. Little by little, I began to feel like myself again, or at least, the version of myself that existed before Elena's betrayal. One evening, as I was going through the house, I stumbled upon a box of mementos from our relationship. Old photographs, ticket stubs, anniversary cards. Each item felt like a dagger to the heart. For a moment, I considered throwing it all away, but instead, I packed it up and put it in the attic. I wasn't ready to let go completely, but I also couldn't bear to have it in plain sight. What surprised me most during this time was the anger that lingered just beneath the surface. Not just anger at Elena, but anger at myself, for not seeing the signs sooner, for allowing her to diminish my self-worth, for believing her lies even when my gut told me otherwise. I started seeing a therapist, and it was during one of our sessions that I realized how much I had compromised myself for her happiness. She made you believe that you weren't enough, my therapist said gently. But that's not a reflection of you. It's a reflection of her own emptiness. Those words stuck with me. For so long, I had carried the weight of her dissatisfaction, wondering what I could have done differently, how I could have been better. But now I saw it for what it was. Her choices, her flaws, her inability to appreciate what we had. As the days turned into weeks, I began to rebuild. I reconnected with old friends, people I had unintentionally drifted away from during my marriage. I took up new hobbies, woodworking, hiking, and found solace in the simplicity of creating something with my hands or losing myself in nature. Every day, the pain lessened just a little bit. I still thought about her, of course. Memories would surface when I least expected them, catching me off guard. But they no longer had the power to unravel me. I had survived the worst of it, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I began to feel hope. Months passed, and with each day, I felt a little lighter. The divorce had been finalized with minimal drama. Elena didn't contest anything, likely because she knew she had no grounds to stand on. I kept the house, the car, and the life we had once shared, though it no longer felt like a life I wanted to hold on to. One day, as I was clearing out the last of her belongings from the attic, I came across something unexpected, a letter. It was sealed in an envelope with my name on it, written in her familiar handwriting. For a moment, I debated throwing it away unopened, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was short, her words uncharacteristically careful. Asterisk, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I won't ask for it. I made choices that destroyed us, and I'll regret them for the rest of my life. You gave me love, stability, and everything I ever thought I wanted, and I threw it all away because I was too selfish to see it. I hope one day you find someone who truly deserves you, someone who can love you the way you deserve to be loved. I'm sorry I wasn't that person. Take care of yourself. You'll always be in my heart. Asterisk. Reading it stirred something in me, not forgiveness, but a strange kind of closure. It wasn't enough to erase what she'd done, but it was enough to remind me that the person she had become wasn't the same as the person I had fallen in love with all those years ago. Somewhere along the way, we had both changed. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. With the letter in hand, I walked outside to the fire pit in the backyard. I watched as the flames consumed the paper, turning her words to ash. It felt symbolic, a way to finally let go of the anger and sadness I had been carrying. In the months that followed, I started creating a new version of myself. I sold the house that had become a graveyard of memories and moved to a smaller place closer to work. I continued therapy, worked on myself, and even started dating again. Slowly, cautiously. One evening, while hiking a new trail I'd discovered, I found myself standing at the edge of a cliff, overlooking a valley bathed in the warm light of the setting sun. It struck me then how far I'd come, both literally and metaphorically. The man I had been, the one who had been blindsided by Elena's betrayal, felt like a distant memory. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt free. As I stood there, the words my therapist had said months ago echoed in my mind. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's choices. I smiled, letting the breeze wash over me. It wasn't the ending I had imagined for my marriage, but it was the beginning of something new. A better story. My story. And for the first time, I was excited to see where it would lead.